Okay, welcome back. It's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Giancarlo Corsetti. I think everyone in this room knows Giancarlo, but just for the record, Giancarlo is currently also the Pia Werner Chair and is a professor of economics at EUI, and before that, a whole string of other universities, including Cambridge, Yale, Rome, Bologna. And he's a renowned scholar on international macro, which these days, again, is very much back and alive and kicking, but also the link to monetary policy, which is what we always care about, and this is why many of us have followed this research over the years. And I would also like to emphasize that Giancarlo is one of those exceptions in the profession, also tries to think about applications to the euro area, treating the euro area as an open economy and not a closed economy, right? So now today he's going to talk about everything we care about today. And so the title has every buzzword in it: trade wars, exchange rates, and monetary policy. So we're very much looking forward to that. And so please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Global imbalances and vehicle currency is missing there, so there is so much more. AI. So unfortunately, curb your enthusiasm. I will not talk about everything. So it is a very, I'm very pleased to be here. I should come to the ECB more often, I guess. I missed the dialogue with the European Central Bank on theory and empirical policy issues. I take this opportunity to recap what I did on the monetary stabilization of tariffs. Perhaps not because they are the main determinants of the inflation and output trade-off, but because they're present in the ex post sense, with surprises. Sometimes the announced tariff is not what we see in reality, and also creating a general sense of discomfort and uncertainty, which is relevant for the dynamic. So let me go. I just put a few graphs that I don't want to talk much about. There are some papers now looking at taking a historical perspective. The reason why I like this kind of graph, because when they try to do analysis with narrative extraction of shocks, and when you try to do analysis of the transmission of these shocks, you find very interesting differences across times. And looking across the samples, which is basically before the World War II and after World War II, you see real exchange rates responding very different, and even the current account responding very different. And if you think about what changed, many things change also within these large samples. You can think that there is more trade in manufacturing. There is also longer production chain, and there is also more monetary policy, right? There is monetary policy has gone a long way from the gold exchange standard to modern. And what you can see, the response of to these shocks show up in the way central banks set rates. And so this is what I wanted to show you, that there is a sort of a difference, as long as you can trust this narrative identification, there are systematic differences. Maybe if this new world goes on, we should spend more time looking at different samples, try to extract determinants that interact with the decision to stabilize the economy. This is a premise. It's a wishful thinking, like something I would like to do more. And I go to more recent history when, after Trump won administration, Paul Berging, we were sort of sitting down and thinking of looking at papers written by the Fed at the time. And the papers written by the Fed were carefully executed, except that they look at the transmission of tariffs assuming a standard Taylor rule. And it was not convincing at the time. No, like the first quick and dirty assessment of the transmission of tariff was done using a standard Taylor rule. So we start to think about what is a tariff, different from VAT because it's selective on imports, different from a productivity shock, different from a markups. The revenue accrues to importing country, right? While the markups accrues to the producer. And most important is levying on importance over the border price. So it's a flexible adjustment of price. You know, if you think of the nominal rigidities on the border price, a flexible adjustment. So it cannot be that the standard Taylor rule is a good thing. You know, it cannot be because it's not suitable. So we started to think, okay, let's write a model tracing the effect of the shock on productivity. So you want some kind of roundabout production. You want to have some element of cost push, also in the dynamic adjustment of wages and CPI. We may want to have a misallocation across sectors because tariffs sometimes go into different sectors, some of them closer to homogeneous goods, some of them close to manufacturing. This is something that I didn't do, but people at the Bank of Canada, Luhan has, is this paper in which you look at the transmission across several layers of nominal rigidities, going from border price production, wholesale, retail. And when you do that, you start to think, what is the synchronicity of the price adjustment? So it's actually an interesting research project. And especially for me, relative price misalignment, the exchange rate. So what we do, we say, okay, let's have a look at tariffs that can be unilateral or reciprocal, can be persistent or temporary, and we would like to control for the share of intermediate inputs in production and then try out different assumptions about nominal friction. So what we came out is a paper written for the JE in which basically we're saying that PPI stability is better than CPI-based Taylor rules with some smoothing adjustment on the output, but still welfare dominated. And there are two simple messages. The first one is that in a trade war, basically there is a global contractionary shock, which calls for expansion unless the share of intermediate inputs is very high. And for the US would be well above the level of estimated intermediate inputs using input-output. So we wanted to say in a trade war, actually, the expansion, the motive for expansion dominate using Ramsey policies. In a unilateral tariff, what you want to do, you want to correct the relative price distortion. So you want to have a relative contraction, relative on contraction. You want to have more expansion at home, or if you want, more contraction at home if you want more expansion abroad. After we published this paper, the literature went heavily on the contractionary effect on tariff. And they move away from the two-country model. They go from a one-country model. And all the attention was based on this idea that we want to have a contractionary effect also with a unilateral tariff, which was funny because our paper was not a contraction, it was a relative contraction. So actually, if you look at the input responses, you can have a relative contraction with both countries being expansionary. But the whole point was how contractionary are tariff. So Coulibaly-Bianchi came out with this general idea about fiscal transfer. If you have a tariff that is ad valorem, when I buy an imported good, I may miss that I'm increasing the transfer from the government through the tariff. So there is an externality that creates a motivation for pushing using monetary policy of pushing demand up. There are elasticities. Now, everybody taking a class in international, they know that the trade elasticity, the complementarity comes from a combination of intratemporal, intertemporal elasticities. And indeed, Auclair and others tell us this, that you have sigma is intertemporal, intratemporal elasticity, so you have a sense in which enough complementarity can change the transmission of tariff, making it more or less, more contractionary. There is this idea that tariff-induced uncertainty is contractionary, both for investment and consumption. And there is a beautiful paper by Alessandria that sort of reflects price So forget about monetary flex price. Look at the use of tariff revenue. And it comes with a very anti-Trump result, which is to say, if you use the tariff revenue to grant a tax cut on capital income, that is actually bad. And the reason why it's bad in the model is because there is a lot of monopoly power in capital. So when you give a tax cut to capitalists or to capital income, you are basically feeding rents. No, you much prefer actually a subsidy on investment rather than a tax on capital. So this is the debate that I could see, but there is much more. There is like Smith-Grib, they look more on the... all I'm saying here is the fact that this contraction effect has become the dominant thing. And I would like to sort of change perspective, and instead of looking at just a contraction, let's talk about the change rate, which is the role of the misalignment, of the relative price misalignment in the stabilization. How much is important for central banks? So, and the idea is that you can have an adjustment in the change rate that sort of moderate the effect of tariff on the distortion of the demand in the countries placing the tariff. But as we see, ultimately, this may require some kind of cooperation or like at least a no strategic interaction between the countries involved. And I sneak in from the window of the talk a new model. So maybe at this point we have new Keynesian model or open economy model with one tradable in each country, perfect stabilization. We have a model with tradable, non-tradable, or we have a model with zillions of sectors in which out of enormous input-output, thinking is buried. So there is too much information and you don't think. So let's do step back, go for two sectors, one more manufacturing with nominal rigidities, one more towards homogeneous without nominal rigidities. And use this to basically, so the sector heterogeneity buys me the fact that if you look only to the manufacturing, you get the standard model. Once you add the more competitive sector, you get dynamics that is reminiscent of trade model, and especially a great paper by Bob Lucas about the change rate determination that maybe many people may have forgotten. So what I say in the rest of the talk is the fact that if you look at Ramsey optimal allocation, with a tariff of manufacturing, which is the sticky price sector, you still need a relative home contraction. This relative home contraction at home may be expansionary or contractionary, depending on the elasticities. What is important is that there is this difference. And if you do a tariff on the flexible price goods, think of commodities, think of steel and aluminum, what happened there is that you actually want a robust monetary expansion for reason that you want to basically counteract the effect on the change rate that is hurting the price competitiveness of your manufacturing. Okay, so you put a tariff on steel, there is an appreciation. You would like to avoid that. So the central bank appreciate to avoid killing the price competitiveness of the manufacturing sector. What is different between these two things is that the tariff on manufacturing, so the tariff, let's say, on German cars, call for European expansion. So most of the action of this relative price adjustment comes from the country that is targeted by the tariff. Okay, so tariff on German cars, Euro area, tariff on European cars, Euro area expansion. Tariff on steel and let's say steel and aluminum would call for more for a US participation, US expansion. So let me show you. I'm going to skip the model. I have it in the slide. The slides are also in the paper with Bergen. So we have a differentiated goods sector with monopolistic competition, sticky price, endogenous firm entry, roundabout production, and a non-differentiated goods sector with perfect competition, flexible price. It may or may not be homogeneous. It can be some kind of elasticity substitution across different varieties. It's important to look at ad valorem import tariff for something that I'm going to tell you in a second, and money is rebated to households. So this is just for notation. C is consumption, D is differentiated, N is non-differentiated. Diff comes in different varieties, which actually we have a model with endogenous entry. So N, we have endogenous differentiated good variety, while the non-differentiated good is, we forget about entry. Clearly, the elasticity of non-differentiated is higher than the elasticity of the differentiated good sector. Price index, remember, you will have a tariff coming out that can be differentiated between tradable and non-tradable. Tradable and differentiated and non-differentiated. And basically, what happened with tariffs is that most of the demands functions are the same, except that you are aware that the tariff will change the composition of demand, obviously, in favor of home, when there's a tariff on the differentiated good at home will be more good at home, a stronger demand for home differentiated, and the same thing for the non-differentiated. We will shift the demand. And of course, the output. So household is standard. I just skip over it because you are not very, this is also standard. Since there is sticky price, you just need to keep track of all the use of resources, including also, there is an iceberg cost on trade. There is an element of trade theory in the model, so you need to be acquainted. Okay, so what is important is the non-differentiated goods sector. Because the non-differentiated goods sector, basically, with flex price, brings in a low one price that tightly links the exchange rate to the price in the non-differentiated sector and the tariff. Okay? This is can be monopolistically competitive, but especially in competitive sector, you will see that this links the price to marginal cost. In all these elements, you see, like this is in this page you have these equations and the foreign counterparty, and this low one price that sort of suggests that the exchange rate is completely determined there. It's completely determined in the competitive sector, as long as you are within the cone of differentiation, or as long as that good is produced in both countries. As long as this good is produced in both countries, you see, like, you have an exchange rate that is determined by price, indirectly by wages and productivities, and that's it. So to make the story clearer, I go actually for a model that you can solve very easily, pencil and paper, by basically using a Cobb-Douglas aggregator, very open economy. You can actually, you could have home bias here as long as it's symmetric, if you also have logarithmic consumption. So these log linear preferences here. So I assume this utility function, Cobb-Douglas, and instead of doing Calvo-Rothenberg, I do one period preset prices, which are easy to deal. And remember, in this model, the mu, the multiplier to the budget constraint, is what you call monetary stance. Basically, it's a sufficient endogenous variable that completely captures the monetary stance of the model. And with log utility is basically exactly equal to nominal spending. The wage rate in the equation for the equilibrium in the labor market will be equal to proportional to mu. Okay, so I'm going to present very quickly 4 or 5 results to make my argument. So the first argument is Lucas' whole paper saying that all this fuss about the exchange rate, once you produce the same good in both countries and is competitively produced, the exchange rate is determined there. That's it. This is it. So if you have the production prices equal marginal cost, you can substitute the equilibrium in the labor market that tell you the wages is equal to nominal spending. You have that for the 2 countries. You use the low one price. And again, as long as you produce the same good in the 2 countries, you can have conditions that determine when you exit the cone of diversification. You have this equation that completely determines the exchange rate. So the exchange rate is determined by the ratio of productivity in the non-differentiated goods sector, the ratio of monetary stance, and the tariff. Notice, no tariff in the differential, no tariff on cars there. No productivity on cars, just productivity in the competitive goods and the tariff on the non-differentiated sector. You see the change rate appreciate when you impose a tariff on, so the US dollar should appreciate when you impose a tariff on the steel, let's say steel and aluminum sector. So that means that there is a spillover, right? So you put a tariff on the aluminum and steel, the dollar appreciate, the car manufacturers in the US are annoyed because they lose price competitive given the price stickiness. Okay, so this creates, of course, an issue for monetary policy stabilization. Of course, you also have an effect, a distortion of the tariff that goes into the relative demand for the differentiated goods sectors directly, but doesn't pass for the change rate. The change rate does not react to the tariff on manufacturing. Okay, so this is the monetary policy issue. There is not much we can do for the flex price sector, the non-differentiated sector, but there is this spillover on the other sector that may require stabilization. So, result 3, remember, the tariffs are ad valorem tariff to a large extent are non-markup relevant, markup irrelevant. So when you solve for the Phillips curve, when you do the optimal pricing, you see it's interesting because this is a very simple example in the model. The price, the sticky price that you preset one period in advance as expectation of these terms, that is basically the quantity that you sell that determines the revenue and determines the cost, this red term. The difference between the right and the left-hand side is that P loads on the monetary policy through marginal cost, which is this term, expectation of K and the expected marginal cost, and the optimal markup. So this is the Phillips curve that you have been, you can do with Calvo, it's the same thing. Expected revenue equal expected cost, discount with Calvo, multiplied by the equilibrium markup. So you see, what is interesting there is that if you don't move the marginal cost, these two terms cancel out. So that means that if you expect a tariff coming, the optimal preset price does not move. It's not a function of expectation of the coming tariff. Again, because it's a valorem tariff, so in a way it doesn't feed your markup in a way. It's not markup relevant. But on the other hand, if it immediately tells you how you can affect the preset pricing, which is any monetary policy rule that creates a covariance between this tariff, this productivity, and the marginal cost, that would change the pricing condition. And in particular, if you can have a positive correlation between the monetary stance and the tariff shock in the other countries, you see like the positive correlation between mu and the TED star, then you have a situation in which you can affect the level of price in the catalog, not the preset price ex ante. And in particular, you can basically, if you systematically depreciate in response to a tariff, sustaining demand, that is going to affect the preset pricing by lowering the preset pricing. This is the other result. If you solve for the cooperative policy in this model, you get the monetary stance in the two countries. By the way, in this particular case, it's also the same as Nash. It's a result that I derived with Paolo Pesenti a long time ago. Is the correlation, and Nash is the same thing, this particular specification. You have monetary policies that are basically responding to the tariff, to the differentiated good set by the other country. Clearly, if I sit at home, I need to take care of my demand, and I respond to the tariff on the cars, on differentiated good set by the other country. I also respond, of course, to the tariff on the non-differentiated good, because we saw before he has this effect on the exchange rate and then a spillover on the demand for the sticky price good. So you see that one of the results of this model is that this is a sharp result. Basically, what the optimal monetary policy completely stabilizes the right-hand side of the optimal price equation. So basically, the optimal rules equates marginal cost to basically a constant. So I think there's a mistake here. He basically kills the right-hand side of this equation. He makes it a constant. As a result, he creates actually a link between the optimal perceived price and any expectation of tariff, no? Because people know that the central bank will react to tariff. Okay, so will determine an uncertainty that will go into the optimal ex-ante, if you want, markup over expected cost. So, you can have this term that basically tell you that under the optimal policy, anticipation of a foreign tariff, which is also anticipation of the reaction of central bank to foreign tariffs, tend to increase the perceived price. Of course, in domestic currency, which, remember, you do that when people expect that you react to the tariff by expanding, right? So you increase the perceived price on your catalog in domestic currency, so ex post, when the tariff comes, the expansion will actually create price competitiveness abroad. Now you have a depreciation coming. So this is basically a very sharp result from the model, which tells you that if you put all these things together, you have this prescription that in a cooperative sense, in a global welfare perspective, whenever there is a tariff on a differentiated good, whenever home put a tariff on a differentiated good, most of the action comes from the other country. The expansion will be important to keep its demand up and redress the relative price. And in this particular case, you can have this effect. So basically, you have a wiping out effect. So the change rate appreciates to wipe out around 50% of the increase in the CPI price in the country that imposed the tariff. If you impose a tariff on the aluminum steel, you have this share response. Your monetary policy, the foreign monetary policy, you just prevent any change in the change rate, so to insulate the sticky price sector for any spillover effect coming from there. Okay? So, pencil and paper, you do a model with bells and whistles, you get almost exactly this. Almost exactly this. I'll show you in 5 minutes. So it's an amazing kind of message. Number one, it may be good to look at the sectoral composition of tariff. Number two, we may come to term on a change rate movement. Clearly, the change rate movement you cannot test independent of monetary policy. So there is always the issue of extracting the direct effect from the equilibrium effect. But the implication is basically, in the trade-off between output and inflation, there is this third element, which is the redressing relative price and sectoral allocation, which calls pretty obviously, if you impose a tariff on the foreign better expand, differentiate the good. If you impose a tariff on aluminum steel, you may have an interest in reducing the change rate response, using the monetary policy to reduce the change rate response, exactly not to disturb the equilibrium in the other countries, in the other sectors. So, as you know, these results are predicated on full pass-through. If you go into partial or no pass-through or dominant currency pricing, we know already what's going on, in the sense that you go from an exchange rate that helps you stabilizing relative price to an exchange rate that moves around the markup and income. So you sort of switch the optimal policy from focusing on the exchange rate and the demand through price competitiveness through stabilizing income. And this is a neat result in which basically tell you that if you have local currency pricing in both countries, Half of it, you just want to do price stability because you want to have your own goods to be as stable as possible. Half of it, you're actually stabilizing the importers, the exporters. No, you want to basically, you want to focus on the demand on the CPI. And you do that, this is like many years ago, a generalization of the result on the GME. You have this kind of focus on stabilizing markups and income, and you see this through the level of the CPI. In this case, you have a home expansion. So when I impose a tariff in the case of PCP, all the action was in the other country to sustain demand. In the case of LCP, it's not me. I want to stabilize the demand at home. So I respond with an expansion to my own tariff. And if you do a dollar pricing, you just get the mix. But most important is we know dollar pricing usually posits a little bit of a, it gives an incredible privilege to the country issuing the dollars, but also creates an enormous responsibility. The incredible privilege is that in principle they can behave as if they were in a closed economy and just do basically like inflation target. It's not exactly price stability because you have the tariff, but then you can just concentrate on your own country. If you have a cooperative equilibrium, there is this mix in which you want to, at the same time, stabilize income and markups in your country, also the exporters, and redress the relative price in the other country. And this is exactly what this thing tells you. And as is very well known, Pareto is not necessarily Pareto optimal for the country that issue the dollar to, or the dominant currency to cooperate. You have global welfare, but it's not Pareto not necessarily Pareto for the country that issue the currency. So to just very quickly, I go to the full model with calibrated to the US and the EA. There is nothing strange in the parameters value. We have tariffs that are temporary, so there is a tariff uncertainty with some persistent, actually not so much persistent because here we use, in the baseline, we use Barattieri et al. And what you see here is the fact that if you have an optimal currency, an optimal Ramsey policy, cooperative Ramsey policy, you have some gain relative to the case of doing just a Taylor rule with smoothing parameter response to output. There is some gain, and that is distributed into two countries. One thing I want to call attention is that the distribution is, tends to be in favor of the home country that imposes the tariff, but not necessarily. Like there are cases of reversal. Like for example, the persistent tariff is actually all in favor of the other country in terms of relative gain. And here you have all the difference. You can start to play around with complementarity, with elasticities of various types, persistence of tariff. You can play around with the PCP, DCP, or LCP. You get a result that more or less show you that there is an uncertainty component. Those are like gains, including also the transition. There is a sense in which you can do better by not doing plain CPI-based Taylor rule with a smoothing parameter on the interest rate and response to output. And gains are lower relative to PPI. So if you actually do domestic price stability, the delta of optimal cooperation is not great. And you see also more clearly the fact that sometimes the home countries are actually losing. The home country is losing because of especially in the dominant currency case, because it needs to create, address spillovers in the other country by deviating from what is optimally in an inward-looking sense. Okay, so this is more or less the picture of what the premise. I want to make a small announcement here with Martin. So some people say, okay, this is two countries with global cooperation. Haha, no, we don't see that. So number one, I'm not sure. Because, in a way, monetary policy, you still see each other, despite you talk. But then where is Martin Bodenstein? We had this result that is coming that actually, remember, if we show that if you delegate monetary policy to people with slightly different preferences than the President, Trump, meaning they have some preference for the rest of the world, like 80-20, and markets are sufficiently diversified, you have an equilibrium that is close to cooperation. And the reason is the fact that anytime I try to take advantage by deviating, first of all, I feel Luke is crying, so I feel bad. I feel that I'm taking advantage of him. And second, financial markets are redistributing. Okay, so to be concrete, if the Fed does something bad, banks are able to Europe, maybe Powell knows us very well and say, I don't like that. On top of that, we own a lot of equities in the US. So much of the gains come from us. So this gives you an equilibrium that is close enough to cooperation. We hope to publish this paper in the next 45 years, given the multiple demand on policy. But it was for us very important to know that, because sometimes people say, why do you do cooperation in monetary policy? There is a sense in which the idea of delegation that comes from Ken Rogoff, you want to delegate a central bank that has different preferences than the average, it applies also in the international context in a way that can be very good for meeting and trying to find out the monetary policies that are actually good for the global stability and global stabilization. So let me go quickly to tell you how the model, remember the little model that has all these very sharp results? You do the big model, you find the fingerprints of the small model in a way that is almost embarrassing. So this is the transmission of a unilateral tariff in a model with roundabout production, all the nice things that you can think of, under a PPI targeting rule that is basically reproduces the natural rate under PPP, under a PCP. Now with full pass-through, you have natural rate. So you have a unilateral tariff of the home country. The home country has a contraction with some inflation. The foreign country also has a contraction with some inflation on impact. But you also see there is also a very interesting distortion in the allocation across the two goods, differentiated and non-differentiated goods. Okay? And there is an appreciation of the exchange rate that comes not from the tariff itself, but from the PPI rule, because there is a response of monetary policy there to keep the PPI completely fixed. So when you go into a Taylor rule, the Taylor rule sort of, it is like the ... relative to the dash. It sort of gives you, because of the smoothing term on the interest rate and because of the interest in smoothing also output, gives you attenuate the fall in output in the home country that imposes the tariff. So there is a little bit of a change in the cyclical, but also attenuate the home exchange rate appreciation. So there is a sense in which it goes in the direction of expanding, attenuating the interest rate, the exchange rate appreciation. And you see like the home PPI indeed is very strong and the foreign is falling. When you go into the optimal rule, you see this reversal of fortune. It is the foreign, remember, it is the foreign country that needs to take care of the level of demand and attenuate and change the exchange rate. So there is this big expansion. It goes from contraction in PPI terms, it goes expansion in PPI terms, and you have more action on the exchange rate that redresses the relative price distortion. And indeed also changes the sectoral reallocation. It contains the sectoral allocation from the tariff. So this is, I think, is an important message also kind of a research project to try to understand the composition of the tariff and this aspect of relative participation, no, in redressing the relative price distortion. So this is just to take stock. Under PPI, in a natural rate allocation, you have the inflation, stagflationary shock. Tariff reduces output and increases inflation, gives you too much sector allocation and dollar appreciation. With the Taylor rule, with a smoothing parameter, now if you are like more in the mood of wait and see, let's look at the data and whatever, at this point you could go for, in a way, excessive. So you swing from having an optimal participation of the foreign country through an expansion, you're redressing the stabilization problem, to too much action in the home country. So there's too much, too much excessive expansion in the home country. Okay, so there is this kind of message that basically, in a case of unilateral tariff on the differentiated goods, is the rest of the world that sort of has the incentive, at least the theory tells you, as an incentive to participate more in the stabilization. Many of the papers start, Berg and Corsetti are wrong because they are contractionary. I mean, there is no contraction here. Just you need to publish, so people need to be very good. But there is a confusion between relative contraction and absolute. No, you need to sort of write the model in a complete set of equations. And it is true that there is something different between a small open economy and a two-country model. With the small open economy, you kill much of the action on the exchange rate and the effect of the exchange rate on the relative price. So this is it's a question of a choice. If you look at US and Euro area, I guess the two-country model would be more appropriate, just to think more about the aspect, the component of the exchange rate in the loss function and the optimal monetary policy design. Okay, so the DCP, you see, like if you look for the dollar pricing, any kind of inward-looking policy would tell you, would give much more weight to an expansion, let's say in the US, than the optimal policy, exactly because there is this kind of call for the US to come and rescue the global economy through an expansion, through a policy targeting also the relative price. So you see that actually it is an expansion relative to the PPI policy. There is this combination of home expansion in the home country and basically almost PPI stability in the other country. Remember, one of the standard results when you do dollar pricing is the fact that for most countries, what you want to do, you want to stabilize. Let's say you want to stabilize nominal marginal cost in domestic currency, which is close to PPI. While most of the action in the stabilization of relative price and the global economy comes from is responsibility of the country at the center of the system. This is an example where you put the tariff on the. Is this the time remaining is for the whole team or only for me? For you, okay. So because I want to leave space for questions. So the case of the tariff on the commodities, again, remember there is this issue that per se the tariff on the commodity appreciates the currency, but has no effect. There is nothing one can do for monetary policy in a system, in a sector that is flex price, but it has the spillover of the exchange rate on the other sector. So again, you have, with PCP, we have exactly almost the same result as in the other tariff. Much of the action comes from the foreign, initiative, but this time as the opposite sign. No? Instead of an expansion, you want a contraction, because you want to basically come together and avoid the appreciation, the excessive appreciation of the dollar to minimize the spillover on the sector that is sticky price. So if you compare the PCP, most of the action come from the foreign in terms of an expansion. In the case of dollar pricing, in the case of the tariff on the non-differentiated good, most of the action comes from the foreign policy, but in this case, of a contraction. Okay, so to conclude, perhaps we should think more about the change rate, the role of the change rate in this stabilization game. You cannot use ball open economy model. There is a price for it. You don't get the action, complete action, or in terms of exchange rate misalignment, relative price misalignment. I would say that given the fact that we have input-output, going from one good model to 150 sectors, there is intermediate steps one can take and have a principle of categories, like which sectors are more flex price, which sectors are more forward-looking. We can try to differentiate the type of sectors we deal with. And in that case, you will get this kind of result, that a tariff on the sticky price, you act on it directly. A tariff on the flex price sector, you have to act indirectly. Sometimes the prescription is exactly the opposite of what you get in the sticky price sector, in the case of the sticky price sector. So you may ask the question, so but what is the evidence? Now, one of the problems, so there are two things. With Daniel Ostry and Simon Lloyd, we tried to do this paper looking at the transmission of shocks in the first Trump administration, second Trump administration. And what you see there, that one of the problems of working with tariff is that you need to think of what happened in the rest of the world. And we thought that we found a nice way to calculate input responses for tariffs that are unilateral and tariffs that are retaliated against. There's been a little bit of discussion whether the identification is good or not, but the results that we get are pretty much in line with what you expect. You have an appreciation, a unilateral tariff of the US or the dollar, and you get basically either nothing or a depreciation when the tariff is retaliated. So any exercise we do, we need to be careful because, basically, especially in the sample where we had the WTO acting, many of these tariff shocks, depending on how you calculate, are actually progress in the WTO liberalization or application of WTO rules. So there is always a global component, that's what I'm saying. And in the case of the 2025, there is something different, of course, which is the fact that relative to the previous case of the Trump administration, the dollar still goes the way you think. So respond to a tariff with an appreciation, but there is a large difference in the response of asset prices like the 10 years or longer bond yields, two-year bond yields. So it's a different nature of the shock, that's what I'm saying. So also this gives you yet another complication that may blur the sharp application of what I said so far in terms of what you do when there is a tariff. But that is the caveat. I just want to tell you that perhaps we should also think as a sample for empirical work, what happens when one of the two countries fix the exchange rate. This would be relevant for the euro area neighbors. So you can actually use the small models. This is in a small appendix here. You have still a very sharp a prediction for the pencil and paper model that you can take to the input responses. I don't go to talk about this because it would be too long, and I've already been trying to confuse you with all this algebra. But I guess the result have been clear what I'm saying, like the fact that there is a sense in which the answer, the question, is a tariff going to be contractionary, should be a little bit rephrased in terms of is the tariff going to be contractionary, distort sectoral allocation of consumption and output, and distort relative price in a way that is a bit richer than the two output model. So that will create a little bit more of a dynamic and food for thinking. Let me stop here and get questions or comments.
Great. Thanks so much, Giancarlo. So the floor is open for any questions. I'll start here with Matteo.
Easy question, please.
Great talk, of course. There are two things I would like to hear your thoughts about. When one thinks about a lot of tariff shocks, they are never tariff shocks. It's always news, and it's always news with a probability that it may happen at some point in time, or it may not happen. So that's obviously has a large impact on what asset prices do, exchange rates do, and also how macro variables react. And relatedly, most large tariff shocks, okay, I see how they work in the model, but obviously in reality, they trigger, especially when I think about what Martin was presenting earlier, like there's a lot of other things happening at the same time as there are tariff shocks, and they obviously trigger reallocation of capital. They trigger rethinking about, say, the fiscal position or the fiscal strategy of a country. So obviously, a lot of the effects you see from tariffs to exchange rates, they may be actually caused by tariffs, but they may not only work through the fact that tariffs change the relative price of goods. There's much more than just that. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that too.
I'll collect 3 questions.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Good. Next up is Anusha. There, penultimate row. Anusha started today as a Duesenberg Fellow here at the ECB. Please come and see her on the 8th floor.
Thanks, Luke, and thanks for the keynote. So I'm just thinking about the U.S. economy in the aftermath of the Liberation Day tariffs, and you were getting to that at the end of the talk. So there's some facts, right? So we've seen pretty robust economic growth, 2.1% in 2025, forecast to be 2.3% by the IMF in 2026. At the same time, we see inflation ticking up, coming in at about 3.5%, and a dollar depreciation against an advanced economy area like the euro area. So I was just wondering, how should we think about optimal monetary policy given these facts in the context of your model?
Okay, and then the third question, Leo, here on your right. And then I'll collect another round afterwards, okay.
Leo von Taden from the ECB. So thanks a lot for this super interesting presentation. But I have one specific question, namely whether you could clarify a bit more exactly the strategic game that is played here. My understanding is that in most of your talk, you assume there's a unilateral, one-sided increase in tariffs, and then given this, very interesting results on cooperation, non-cooperation between central banks with interesting nuances. But in case we want to map this into the, simplifying a little bit, the situation between the US and Europe. In Europe, there's not only the ECB, we also have the Commission. So, and the Commission is in charge essentially of thinking about responses in terms of tariffs. So isn't there an underlying game how we address the tariff war, which is settled, where the ECB shouldn't have a role? And given this, then we think about a monetary policy response to all this.
Okay. Yeah, very quickly. So Yeah, like the tariffs trigger a lot of stuff, throttle allocation. I completely agree. We need to think about the fiscal and whatever. What I'm saying is the fact that so I just wanted to show an ex post effect of tariff that is feeding the ex ante simulation of the model with all the result. So in a way, it is modest, but it's not, in the sense that you just want to go into this complex question by having a precise grasp of what's going on from the tariff itself. So I completely agree. There are lots of other things happening. And in particular, something that worries me is the following. I don't think this tariff will have... so the impact per se, the transmission on tariff and GDP can be modest. Also the question, the answer to Anusha. This is not where the action can be, at least because there is so many other things going on. What worries me is actually what happened after the dust of the reallocation and recombination of production chain is gone. And in particular, I would like to assess what is the effect on the concentration of market. I mean, if you look at the long-run effect of this, suppose that we go into a higher tariff world, recomposition of value chain, technology will help increasing the elasticities of substitution. So many of the stuff will be absorbed by the... What will not be absorbed, maybe, is the fact that we'll have segmented markets nurturing concentration. And since concentration now has become shamelessly the provider of money for politics, we may go all the way to a world in which basically big actors, thanks to this segmentation of markets, will have even more firepower to get sort of this two-way sustaining rents and political rents and economic rents. So again, you should not read too much in this particular model. This is one element. Also to Anusha, there is many things going on. When I try to do literally what is the transmission of tariff, there is not much there, as we know. It's more the policy and the dynamics that come from also many other stuff, including technology, including investment and everything. The strategic game, this is monetary. I'm talking about monetary, but I take this thing as given. It is fully random, the model. Like, when we simulate the model, we have several different scenarios for the game that you have in mind. We don't do that. I just want to make this point that in a world of increasing geopolitical fragmentation, one of the questions is whether the community of central bankers will keep some rhyme and reason. And as a matter of fact, I'm writing a paper with Emil about the tariff diplomacy, whether we need a change in the objective function of the monetary policy. I hope not. But there's also this question of whether the community of central bankers can keep some kind of cooperative spirit, which is basically mostly justified by your mandate. I mean, your mandate is not to make the global economy well, but there is an element of common interest there that can be easily internalized. I know it's frustrating, my answer, but your question is even more frustrating. So too many things going on. Should we go another?
Just to clarify, the mandate is very much national spirit.
No, completely. But remember,
events like this are more in the spirit of cooperation.
Sure, but when I say like this, like remember, we already done this, no, with Rogov, like this idea. So nobody says that people should be naively interested in the global welfare. Just saying that there is a smart way to pursue national interest that may take indeed in the simulation that we did on cooperation with Martin and Luca Guerrieri, where we asked the question, would you like to keep cooperating or not? We have sometimes even like a mixed result in which conditional state of the economy there could be an interest, in keeping internal S&P lower.
I think those results are interesting because even if you have a national mandate, of course you take global inflation as an input.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
You're
So
thinking in this way it gets closer to cooperation in spirit.
No, this is exactly what I'm saying. Like
So
there is a
that's-
sense of noticing that.
Good. So we have, unfortunately, time for only one more question. Can you pass the microphone here up front? Yeah.
Thank you. So Martin Bernstein from the Federal Reserve. Quick question on, so in the Bianchi-Coulibaly world, there is this, because of the small open economy, the terms of trade are taken exogenously. And so any tariff in that world is clearly welfare deteriorating. And so, but in your world, and this I think goes back to the question earlier, so if you start from a zero tariff, in many of these models, actually a unilateral tariff can be welfare improving. So is there any sense in your world of how how the responses that you see depend on sort of the initial tariff base that's stated in there? And the other somewhat related issue is a little bit on the persistence of the tariff. So, I mean, I think it was clear in your world that the tariff is temporary. There's sort of a mean reversion to it, because a lot of these results can very much depend on that. And again, a lot of these other contributions have assumed permanent tariffs, which probably also in light of Matteo's comments are, I think he made a nice description of how probably we shouldn't see them as permanent. And so maybe you can lose a few words on the role of the international financial flows that helps sort of smooth tariffs and how you see sort of that ability to smooth any of these kind of shocks through financial markets affect sort of the results that you see. Thank you.
So I have two comments on this. The first one is that once you start looking at optimal tariff, you immediately run into the plethora of questions that is cocky-mookie. Now they're trying to look at whether or not, depending on it's actually our joint work, depending on the position on the external debt. The other thing I want to stress is that this model does not have the optimal tariff only. It has also the home market effect. And there is, so if you are in trade, the Raphael Hossa paper on the tariff, so it's basically reflecting the debate in trade. So trade, there is this idea of the optimal tariff as intervening on the monopoly power in terms of trade. But there is also another theory, a little bit less discussed, which is the production relocation externality. So this is a model with production relocation externality. Actually, the tariff that you want to impose doesn't go into the terms of trade per se. It goes into the fact that there is an interest in having, so suppose you have two sectors. One is, let's say, more value added, the other one less value added. Could be, for example, if you pay, if cars, you pay efficiency wages. Now there is more value added there. So there is an interest in the country in producing more, no? In shifting. So in this kind of models, actually, the reason to put the tariff is not so much the monopoly power in terms of trade, but to try to get as much as possible, to use the home market effect, not to increase the availability of intermediates and goods in your own country and then ship it outside, no? Like, and make the other guys pay the transportation costs so they become less productive. So what I'm saying is that when we talk, I mean, I'm happy to go into this optimal tariff game and whatever. Our models, not even the world, but even our models are richer. So maybe we should pay attention also to this second element. This model has the production relocation externality that is much stronger than the effect on the monopoly power in terms of trade.
All right, so I need to close here, unfortunately. Thank you very much, Giancarlo.
Happy to.